before I go to work today. Simple. I have to call the locksmith, right? Because my lock is broken. Now, if I ask you why, you're probably going to tell me because I don't want somebody breaking into my house. I ask you why again. I don't want my things stolen. I ask you why again. You see what I'm saying? Keeps going. What do you mean by stolen? Why do you value these things? What is value? What is all this? So you can't reduce it. It keeps going and going and going and going because it's contextualized by the world that we live in. A lock. A lock has so many meanings. Believe it or not, we look at a lock on the door and we think, oh, it's just a lock on the door. But think about it. Why do we need locks? So people don't break into our house, right? But why do we care if people break into our house? You laugh, but think about it. Because we have a certain values about our own possessions. There are actually certain cultures in the world that don't care if you go into their house. Have you ever been to Nigeria? When I was going to UIA in Ustac, I had Nigerian neighbors. And coming from the West, this was very strange for me because their kids would always come in my house and take my things, And I was like, what's going on? So I would go complain to the parents, like, your children are stealing from me, And I'm sorry to say that. I know they're kids, so maybe they don't know any better. And then one day, I didn't get angry or anything, but I was inquiring as to why this kept happening because I started locking my door after that. And one of the older Nigerian brothers, he said to me, in our cultures in the village, everyone raises the children. So they come in and out of the houses and take what they want because everyone is their mother. So they think that I'm like his parent. And I'm like, well, I said, well, in my culture, we're related by blood. So, and nobody comes into my house unless with my permission. And he said, oh, okay, I'm sorry, I understand. I'll tell my children not to do it. So we settled the issue. But we had this issue for a few years because there would be times I'd park my bike outside and it would be broken because the kids were riding it around or something, or they would use random objects from my house, so because they thought these were all theirs. They were their possessions. They didn't know any better because this is part of their culture. So for them, they don't lock the house in Nigeria because everyone is part of the community. It's all their house. And if somebody takes something from your house, it's normal because you can take something from their house because everyone shares the materials. It's very normal. And sometimes they said even you'll see women who are not even related to the children breastfeeding the kids and taking them around, and sometimes you think, oh, this must be their child. And it's like, no, she belongs to my neighbor, But it's perfectly normal in many places in Nigeria. It's perfectly normal. You can't even tell who belongs to who there. See, but in my cultural context, I need a lock on my door. Okay? Because if anybody from my culture comes into my house, they're probably going to get shot. All right? Without my permission, that is. Of course, I'm not going to shoot anybody. But you know what I mean, right? Because there's a different way that we live. So the concept of a lock may not be understood in Nigeria, because they don't have them. But here in in the United States or in Malaysia, it's perfectly normal. And we understand because we have certain values that surround the concept of the lock. So a lock, just a very simple lock on your door, has so much meaning. You can fill a novel with it. I'm not even kidding. I'm not kidding. Continue asking yourself questions about this. That was weird. Continue asking yourself questions about this. Why do I have a lock on my door? Why do I value possessions? Why do we have the concept of possessions? Continue to, and you keep asking more and more questions, right? It just keeps going on and on, even if it may seem absurd to you. So Willard Quine said that we live in a web of knowledge that contextualizes things, okay? And what we call scientific theories today is that web of knowledge. All right? The concept of a scientific theory, a lot of people I'm going to clear the room right now of this misconception, unless you need to understand. A theory does not mean that the scientists don't believe it's true. A theory simply means, it simply means a structure by which we can interpret data. That's it.
After what is that? After what is that?
After what?
After what is finished?
Yeah. So for instance, like if you say the theory of evolution, and we're going to talk about evolution later, so let's not get too, now some people in here might be like, why is he talking about that? Not good, you know. But the theory of evolution is considered by scientists to be fact. They don't call it a theory because they think it's not true. They call it a theory because the word theory means something entirely different from untrue or not certain. It means this is our tafsir. Okay? Theory means basically tafsir, all right, to the scientific community. A hypothesis is a little different. All right, that's something that we're attempting to ascertain whether this can be a theory, whether something can be certain. Okay? Now, it doesn't mean that a theory is absolute fact. We're going to get into that in a second as well. Okay? Because Thomas Kuhn will reject that notion. But it does mean that the theory is interpreting the data correctly, at least according to contemporary opinion. All right? So, let's move on to Thomas Kuhn. He is actually my favorite philosopher of all time, so I have a lot to say about him. Okay? He actually attended the same university as Quine, which is why he actually got where he got most of his ideas from. And he went on to suggest another concept. He called Quine's holistic, patterns or holistic structure a certain word, and we use this word in everyday English today. It's called paradigm. You ever heard the word paradigm? That was invented by Thomas Kuhn. Okay? The word paradigm was invented by Thomas Kuhn. And what Kuhn said was that we have these holistic structures of knowledge in which we use to interpret things. And sometimes this web, right? Okay, so let's say this is a theory, okay? Let's call this theory number 1, all right? So theory number 1 has been interpreting data for the past 100 years. Scientists have been working with this theory, and they've been making a lot of good predictions with it, okay? So let's say this theory was the Ptolemaic system before. Okay, let's say that this theory was the Earth was the center of the universe and everything rotated around it, okay? So we have the sun and everything, all the other planets rotating around. Okay, so this was a very successful theory actually during its time. Very successful. And what I mean by that is it actually predicted quite a lot. So a lot of people say, well, it's outdated, but in actuality, they did a lot of scientific discovery. They discovered a lot of things in astronomy because of this theory. Okay? Now what happened later on was that scientists started getting very confused though about certain things like the eclipses and things like this. They couldn't figure out why, if everything was going around the world, okay, in a very systematic fashion, why was it that sometimes it was very erratic, meaning that it was very chaotic? So they started coming up with different things. Okay, so if this is the case, maybe the planets don't go in one system, maybe they go like this too. Maybe they go like this, and maybe some go like this, and some go like this. And so they kept going more and more complex. And then eventually somebody said, this is just too much. Maybe it's more simple than that, So they started encountering something we call anomalies. Thomas Kuhn calls anomalies. And what it means is that changes or things that would not be usual, okay, so unusual behavior, all right? And so this theory kept getting more and more and more complex. So one day, Copernicus decided, well, maybe I can solve the problem. But instead of putting the Earth at the center, let me put something else at the center. So he puts the sun at the center, okay? And all of this here became much more simple. Much more simple. And he solved a lot of the problems with the eclipses and stuff. I'm not getting into too much detail as to what those are because that will take a whole discussion that I'm not worth. You can actually read up on it. Okay, the transference of theories, okay? Now what occurred eventually was that the scientific community did not want to adopt this yet. Okay, why? Several reasons. One, some of them had jobs and they wanted to keep their jobs. And if they were wrong all this time about this theory, they would lose their jobs. So they said, no, we're going to reject this. This is nonsense. Okay? Some of them were astrologers. Does anybody know what astrology is? Okay, so they would do what with astrology? They would determine your destiny based on the movement of the stars and the planets. So they used the poltemic system in this way. So the astrologers were very famous back then. Their jobs were on the line. So they said, we're not changing this theory. Okay, we lose our jobs otherwise. And also, politicians used astrology. So they said, no. If you're correct